When walking in to replay golf and spotting the brand new Titleist GT driver, I was completely unaware of the facts I was going to uncover the next day. The GT2 in particular boasts a powerful balance between stability and distance, and with a price tag of $579, you hope this statement can be justified. However, by the end of this thorough test of the last 5 generations of Titleist drivers, not only did I get the answers to the burning questions you might have, but finally get the proof I needed for my hypothesis when it comes to buying brand new equipment for the average golfer. Here's the rules. Every driver will be using the same shaft. The GT2, the TSR2 and the TSI2 are all 10 degrees. Sadly, Titleist had different loft combinations before this, so the 917 is at 9.5 and the TS we have at 10.5. That being said, these differing loft options were quite eye-opening as the test went on. The testing was split into 2 rounds of 5 shots with each driver, the order being oldest to newest, so not to give an advantage to particular models dependent on how warmed up I became. Lastly, I tried my best as a human to put the exact same swing on every driver and keeping the impact numbers as close as humanly possible. Starting with round 1, we used the Titleist 917D2, and at this point I'm very glad that I did the 2-round testing, as this driver had the biggest difference in gains of distance and dispersion. There's a reason I recommend this driver to so many beginners, especially with the £80 price tag. But also, Titleist for me is arguably one of the most consistent driver developers, meaning for the longest time they've complemented their previous models and enhanced them, but in the same breath not reinvented the wheel just to grab headlines. It was a very solid start from the 917D2 and a very good benchmark in distance and efficiency, even though later on in the testing it's very apparent where new driver distance comes from and not necessarily the buzzwords that we hear year after year. Next, the highest lofted driver in the pack, the TS2 at 10.5, came out with some surprising gains. However, this is when I started to realise how swing weight, general feel could make such a difference between heads, as even though I was swinging as consistently as possible, I found personally, for me, the strike location on the TS2 was higher up on the face, causing this high launch and less spin, resulting in incredible gains in distance, and goes to show how important launch and spin is when it comes to getting more distance off the tee. The TSI series I ranked recently as one of the best value drivers of 2024, but there's probably a reason I got on so well with the TSI3 in that testing and not necessarily this TSI2. Again, this exaggerates the importance of not necessarily a newer driver being better for you in terms of technology, but just head type and shaft combination. However, I did start to note the apparent increase in club head speed, and I was at this point wondering, is it me or is it actually the equipment? And that becomes a lot more apparent when we get into round 2. However, the added speed, the added ball speed didn't equate into more distance as the spin was too high. Again, the lower spinning TSI3 model would have comfortably rectified this in my eyes, or a larger pool of testing data at different times in the day across different weeks of the year, as we'll learn to realise through this data how much of a variable we are as golfers. Now, bearing in mind my whole channel revolves around older and more affordable equipment, I'm arguably the perfect person to do this test, as any human bias would lean towards the older equipment performing the same as the newer equipment. However, I can't ignore the subtle differences between the next 2 clubs and obviously the older generation. Overall, if we line up the range next to each other, something became quite clear to me. The older the club, the more offset it was at address, and the newer the club became, the deeper the face was. Considering for the longest time my overall bad shot is a duck hook left, no wonder I generally felt more comfortable with the newer versions of the 2 range, whether that's the G2, TSR2, TS2, TSI2, you get the point, because the newer versions didn't sit as close to the target when I laid them down on the ground. And to me, this makes sense, as the older generations of Titleist drivers, they had limited heads. The 917 range had 2 heads, D2, D3. The TS range had TS2, 3 and 4, and nowadays we have 4 different models that can be fine-tuned to any Titleist fan. However, with that all being said, this is the 4th driver tested, and with the slight increase in club head speed down to either warm-up or technology, which we'll talk about, when we look at efficiency out the middle and obviously off-center hits that I hit throughout this testing, there is negligible difference from the range. Every day is a school day, and I finally understand what forgiveness is. Now, every one of these heads is forgiving and efficient off the toe and heel, even though the data down the right-hand side that gives you this distance lost and distance gained between heads, you'll see in round 2 how it kind of flips on its head. However, there is no question from the older models how much more I felt from the off-center hits. It didn't necessarily mean massive reductions in distance, however, the confidence on hitting an off-center shot and feeling how solid behind it, I can see being a massive benefit in a club fitting scenario where the player feels it's more forgiving, more solid, as well as obviously being on the course. If you hit the ball out the toe and heel and hardly feel like you did, obviously you're going to feel like you're swinging it better. But with the GT2 numbers in place, we're starting to see where distance comes from. Now, the added club head speed definitely can be a difference, and we'll cover this more in round 2. But evidently, this is where the increase in ball speed is coming from, because obviously efficiency is the same across the board with all 5 drivers. Therefore, there has to be another part to this puzzle. If we look at the peak graph, the orange line is the GT2 and the 917 is the red, and you can see there's a progressive increase in launch through all of the models, even with that 0.5 degree loft change between the 2 older ones, as well as obviously the spin on average dropping when you put the ½ degree loft to one side, as well as obviously my strike location and on average where I was hitting the ball. Not to mention the GT2 in this section was the 5th driver tested. I've got my eye in. I'm in this Goldilocks zone, and to be perfectly honest, wait till I show you the next round of numbers. The biggest thing I wanted to know from round 2, and what you guys probably want to know, is are newer models actually able to be swung faster? Bearing in mind, I'm still trying to swing these all exactly the same, putting my subconscious bias to one side. The other factors I want you to pay attention to and get to my hypothesis at the end of this video is my impact numbers. In round 1, my club path was very neutral and I was hitting up through the ball, maybe a touch high, but probably around the appropriate area at 4 degrees. But my biggest fault, especially fatigued or even under pressure on the first tee in a tournament, is these numbers get exaggerated. I get a strong grip, I come more from the inside, I hit even more up through the ball, which can lead to disastrous left shots. With that all being said, the 917 D2 came out the blocks firing as the 6th driver tested in this video. Almost 3 miles an hour faster, and magically my spin had dropped, creating almost the longest and straightest drives of the session. Sadly, this means absolutely nothing. Let me explain. Whether it's me having my eye in or my biased subconscious just willing for this driver to do better, my swing path and angular attack numbers were jacked. Massively on the inside, massively up through the ball. I guess this is a big win for technique, being such a huge role in trying to hit your driver further, and me showing it's possible for an 80-pound driver to go just as far at the same speed as some of the best drivers out there on the market. However, it also highlights what newer generations of drivers are actually able to do better than the older ones. The TS2 and the TSI2 both saw increases in club head speed from round 1. It's also at this point I could tell that I was starting to fatigue. Not in terms of strength or endurance, swinging the club head speed quickly, I could always maintain that, but I'm talking about other flaws, coming too much from the inside, coming too much up through the ball, gripping the club with a much stronger grip. But as we conclude this video, I'll show you why this is so important for you guys to be self-aware when being fitted for a newer driver. Round 2 for the TSR2 and the GT2, and they are now feeling the full force of my swing fault. 5 degrees on average on the inside, and trust me, I'm still trying to hit this neutral at the same kind of speed. There's no question I felt more confident on off-center hits with the last 3 generations of driver. That's including the TSI 2. Not necessarily the performance was any better from what I could see, but they just felt more solid, and that kind of placebo effect on a golf course I can see being a benefit. Something I can't ignore is the peak height in round 2 as well. Obviously, the GT2 now at the bottom as I'm hitting it very much to the left-hand side, which closes the club face and obviously shows the importance of technique above anything else. But even though I crushed the 917, it's still launching lower than the newer models. I almost had to start hitting that big draw shot with the 917 to get the same distance as the TSR2 and the GT2. And that potentially is what scuppered and ruined the rest of my round 2, as I was mimicking it with drivers that didn't necessarily need those kind of impact factors. Which leads me on to my hypothesis for the average golfer and when they're getting club fitted and hitting 50 to 80 drivers. And the one thing this test proves is that there's this zone where you are swinging your best, that Goldilocks zone between being warmed up and then being fatigued. My point is I could see the benefits of the newer drivers, what they are producing. However, I want you guys to be very aware of getting a driver that works well in a room temperature studio after you've hit 30, 40 balls, and finding that driver that works good once you're warmed up and limber, and then wondering why at 8 in the morning on a winter's morning when it's cold, that driver then isn't performing for them. I've showed through this video how launch, spin, ball speed makes such a difference to obviously getting the most distance, but also the wrong combination at the wrong time would then also lead into very destructive bad shots. Round 1, I'd be stupid not to take the TSR2 or the GT2. Then in round 2, the 917 and the TS2, in terms of distance and dispersion, performed the best for my very hooky into-out swing, and you can chalk that up to placebo or bias or the fact this was the 6th and 7th round of testing. However, there's no question if I wanted to hit the same distance without changing the loft, without changing the model of the head, without changing the shaft, which is incredibly important to note, there's no way I'd be able to hit those older heads with that straight ball flight and maintain the same kind of launch and spin numbers. Hence the improvement that we've seen over the last decade and why we see so many tour pros hit such long drives with an incredibly straight ball flight. So no, I didn't see any ball speed increase. No, I didn't see any club head speed increase. And yes, the off-center hits felt solid, felt comfortable, gained me confidence over them. However, the ability to hit higher, less spinning straight drives over the last decade has definitely come a long way. If you've got any questions about your golf bag or golf game, sasgolfacademy.com. Catch you guys later.